you were not in orientation in real life yesterday, I'm Dr. Powell. I'll be at all of these sessions, whether I'm leading them or you can bring up Michelle to get this. So this is also Dr. Barton. This is our director, so you'll see him throughout the summer lots as well. And Gabby is our student worker. You'll see her a lot. She is helping to re-record some of our sessions to add to our YouTube page. So even past the time that you are in this program, you will have access to those materials. She's also going to start passing around a sign-in sheet. So if you could just initial sign next to your name at some point before you leave today, please, that helps us keep track of it. All right, so those are our housekeeping things. So today we are talking about communicating your research. So off the top of your head, when you're thinking about that process of communication and communication of research specifically, what are some characteristics, skills, things to keep in mind that we already know or that we think we should take into consideration? Yep.
Take into consideration the audience that you're communicating your research to.
Absolutely. Audience is going to be such a huge part of the conversation. Great one. Anything else? Yep.
Genre conventions. Genre convention.
Okay, yeah, genre, and yeah, absolutely. What else? Yes.
Enough details for your research.
Enough detail. Yeah, so finding that, striking that balance, and some of that comes back to the audience, right? How much detail do they need, want, what's going to be helpful to them. These are really good observations and all things that we'll touch on today, so you guys are already ahead of the curve, which is great. So we like to start off with thinking about the research cycle, right? When you are working through your research, it is an inherent part of that research cycle that you have to complete. So you can't just stay in this siloed space of doing these experiments and your lab tests and analyzing all this data, doing your interviews, et cetera, without sharing about your work and thinking about what impact that work is making. Because then, as you can see, we kind of have to reflect on that impact, given some of the feedback that we get from different audience members, in order to then refit the research and think and plan and start that whole research cycle over again, which is what a lot of researchers, faculty members, things like that, we just stay in this cycle every day until we die. So it's just kind of this endless loop, right? But it's a very important aspect to be able to articulate your research appropriately and to the correct audience members in a way that makes sense for them. So we're going to think a lot in this session in particular about communicating to non-expert audience members. Okay, so there's a lot of different factors that we can consider when we're working with these types of audiences. Right, so we might be shaping public discourse, influencing public policy. Anybody who's already thinking about like their work is going to influence some sort of public policy, maybe like public health or poli-sci, anything like that. Yeah, what are you working on?
Yeah, public health.
Public health. What's your project about?
It's violence prevention for disease.
Violence prevention, right? So that's going to be huge for some public discourse and public policy, right? I'm sure there are some others that are going to be experiencing or embedding their research in comparable ways. Effective presentations, like the Summer Research Symposiums. We talked about that coming up in July. We need to be able to tailor our messaging to that particular audience. And then, unfortunately, at some point, you're going to have to get a job. Not my rules, just the rules of the land. Or even if you want to go to grad school, right? The conversations that you have with the experts and the faculty who are in that grad program, right? You're going to need to be able to tailor the message of what you did during your undergrad research experience appropriately. So all of this is kind of the groundwork for thinking about why it's important for sharing your research and preparing for that. So when we think about the different modes of presenting, I'm going to go over here because I'm kind of stuck. When we think about the modes of communicating our research, one of my PhD advisors made a comment once. She said, when you get a PhD or when you get really deep into your academics at any level, you know more and more and more about less and less and less, which is kind of a weird thing to think about. But essentially she's saying you get really deep into this niche area of expertise and you don't even realize how deep you're in until somebody tells you like, whoa, I have no idea what you're talking about. That went way over my head. You're speaking a completely new language to me that I've never heard before. So we have to consider how we are navigating in those different social and academic spaces and using the appropriate language. So when we are thinking about our academic space, as a researcher around other experts in that field, we can get into the literature, the backgrounds, how the whole journey of how we came to this really important question and the research design that we wanted to do, giving the supporting details, and then at the end, and here's what I found, right? Because they're invested. There are other researchers, there are other experts who want the discipline to grow and want the research that you're doing to contribute to their field. So they're invested from the jump no matter what. Easy. But if we're talking about the public, they're not so invested all the time. They're not necessarily, they're definitely not experts in your field. They don't always necessarily understand the value of the research that you're doing or what the impact is going to be. So you have to start with the bottom line. And you will hear me say this phrase 1,000 times throughout this summer, but you have to identify the so what. Because inherently, we're all a little bit selfish. We all have a little bit of ego. So when someone tells us, hey, I'm doing this really cool research, it's really hard for us to not naturally go to that, okay, but how does that impact me? Why does that matter to my everyday life? That's just kind of human nature, unfortunately. And so to be able to draw them in and hook them in, you have to lead with that. What is this going to do for broader, whether that's public policy or day-to-day life? How is it going to impact my drinking water that I have access to? Or how is that going to impact my healthcare that I have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, right? So you have to think about that immediate impact and that so what. Then, once you've got them in, you've roped them in a little bit, and they're like, oh, hey, that is something that I've never really thought about that impacts me on a regular basis, but now that you say that, I'm really intrigued to hear how you got there and what you're going to do about it. And then you can bring in the supporting details. But they're not going to care that you start out with hundreds of years ago in a galaxy far, far away, we have this little cell, and then now I'm doing this research that there's like 57 steps in between, right? We have to start the opposite way. So I used to be an English teacher, so I talk a lot about that hook sentence, right? When we think about telling a story, we have the stereotypical, easy breezy 5-paragraph essay that we probably all had to write at some point in middle school or high school, right? So you had the hook sentence, and that hook sentence was kind of important, right? So sometimes you thought you were really creative and original, and you were like, I'm going to start with a quote. No one's ever started a gymnastic with a quote before. And so you start with this quote from somebody in that field, right? But you kind of you're the expert of that 5-paragraph essay. So you're able to say, this quote is setting up my whole next story. Why points 1, 2, and 3, the most important, the medium important, the least important, and the most important points in those order in the essay are going to help you understand the topic better or hear about it if it's persuasive, right? But we have to have that hook and to be able to set up why it's important. So to do that, though, we had, what's your name again?
Mine? Riley.
Riley. We had Riley at the beginning point out that one of the factors we needed to consider was our audience. So this is not the sharpest image, but it is one of the best images. Maybe I need to do another deep dive for a new version of this or just make one myself. So it's not super sharp, but hopefully you can see that kind of fragmentation of the different messages that can come out from that so what. The so what is not a blanket statement. Just like when you talk to your peers in your research, you're not making a blanket statement, right? You're still tailoring your conversation. But then we get even more detailed in thinking about who those audience members are. So they might include peers in the field, symposium attendees, again, like we talk about all the time, all roads lead to the Summer Research Symposium, journalists, policymakers, friends and family. And you can see these different so what. So I know it's a little bit fuzzy, but we have policymakers here. So the policy makers might want to know, does this support or refute my legislation? And do my voters care? Right? So you have to think about how they're going to take your information or research that you've developed, and they're going to leverage it for their own purpose, right? To make sure that their voters are engaged, and it's something that voters will care about and get voter turnout. Managers might think, well, it solves problems on the ground, and who supports it? So managers are much more practical, right? On a day-to-day basis, how is this going to make our lives easier, make our structures smoother, our processes work faster, more efficiently? So your research needs to address there so what. NGOs, how does this fit into our agenda as an organization? Scientists, how does this relate to my research? And is it groundbreaking? So as a lot of you are getting started in research for the first time, probably what you will learn is that your goal is to address impact, right? So we know that there's lots of other research connected to what you're doing right now, but it's your job. One of my other advisors talked about it as an island, right? So we have this really dark island, and every new research is lighting a little candle. Right, so we see this little island and little candles start to pop up everywhere, little lanterns start to pop up everywhere, so we have a better view of where we are in our environment. So your job as a researcher is to find what dark corner isn't lit up yet and to be able to shed some light on that. So in order to be cohesive with the existing science and the existing work in your discipline, or even interdisciplinary work, how they're in conversation together, then how are those pieces of work related? What's the little lantern that you're adding to that groundbreaking space? Then we have media. Is it news and will it sell? So part of our job, and we're all guilty of it, right? We get the clickbait. We're looking at TikToks for 3 seconds and we keep scrolling. We see the really quick headlines on Instagram or whatever. And our attention span is very short, right? So for media, it's your job as the expert to help them think, how can this be condensed to get more traction, more attention? And then the public, like I said already, why does this matter to me? Why should I care? So this thread, not to be too cynical, even though it's kind of my lane sometimes, this thread is kind of about selfishness, right? So it's our job to be able to market to inherently selfish beings and organizations who want to know, why do I care about this? Right? And nobody knows that better than you. You are working on becoming an expert in your particular topic and area, and so it's your job to be able to address what their needs are and collaborate with them maybe on how to continue to tailor that message and refine it. So you can always get feedback from these different spaces, right? But we have to understand that we're not going to walk out of this experience or any research experience with one singular pitch that's going to make sense for every single audience. Okay, so in terms of pitches, almost like I designed that segue on purpose. But we do want a base elevator pitch. So how many of you have worked on your elevator pitch for yourself? I am this person, this is what I'm working on, this is what I'm interested in, right? From maybe the Career Center or something like that. Who's worked on their own elevator pitch before? Okay, a few of you? Okay, if you're not already working on that, definitely want to get the ball rolling on that as you're starting to think about internship opportunities or job opportunities or grad school interviews, right? So when you go into these networking spaces, you have to kind of say really briefly who you are, what you're about. And it can't take 10 minutes. You can't provide your whole life story, right? So we have to think again about how we're starting with that so what. So an elevator pitch for research does a similar thing that it would do for you, your career and academic journey. It verbally communicates the relevance of your research in the context and benefits of society. So a couple minutes, again, it's not super long. You have a few sentences, maybe let's say hypothetically a paragraph that you're able to verbally communicate. So it takes practice, right? To be able to think, oh my gosh, and I know I think about this all the time when I'm writing a paper or trying to communicate my research. It becomes like our baby. I'm like, all of it's important. I have to share all the details because I wouldn't get there without being here, and how do I pick and choose which details are important, right? That takes practice, and it takes intentionality and being able to say, yes, this is important here, no, this is not important there, right? So as you go through your experience, you're going to need to practice continuing to filter and hone your message, and then of course tailoring it to the audience as you would need. So the goal here is not to be like a conveyor belt where one person's walking down and I give my elevator pitch and they go next person, I give my elevator pitch and you go to the next person, I give my elevator pitch, right? It's not like a one-hit wonder kind of thing. The goal is to open up the opportunity for further conversation. So just like that leading with the so what about your research, right? This idea is that it would prompt the audience member to say, you know what, I've never thought about that before, but you raised some really interesting points, and I understood everything you just said, which is amazing because you don't always get that in research communication. So I'd really like to know more about what your process is, how you got here, what you plan to do with it in the future, right? So that's where, if we go back to this guy, we have to start with those bottom lines and so what. So this kind of represents your elevator pitch here, right? And then they may ask for those more supporting details. So sometimes we don't get to that point, and that's okay. Sometimes people hear your elevator pitch and be like, cool, thanks for sharing, and then they'll leave, and that's fine, and you can't take it personally. But that's not necessarily that you did a bad job. It's just maybe that they didn't really clearly connect with that content area. But if they stay and they're asking questions, right, that opens up the opportunity for all of these supporting details, which is the goal of something like a poster presentation. So I talked a little bit about this yesterday at the Summer Research Symposium. We'll have the opportunity to do a version of a presentation. So a poster presentation is, for those of you who have never been part of a conference or symposium before, it's a little bit more laid back opportunity for you to share your research. So you develop a poster, which we will help you, that covers all the important pieces of your research. And you give your elevator pitch, you stand with your poster for an hour, as people come and go, very informal, floating around the ballroom, right? They might come up and say, your poster, your infographics are really cool, your title is really cool, kind of draws me in, you look warm and inviting, so I want to talk to this person, whatever it might be. So you start with that elevator pitch, and that opens up time for an untimed conversation. And that is very distinct, of course, from the traditional oral presentation, which is also an option, but you have a pretty clear, like you're presenting for 12 minutes, you're answering questions for 3, hard stop, right? So the elevator pitch is a little bit lower stakes. You can answer as many questions as the person comes around and asks of you, or as few as they ask of you. And so that gives you a little bit of opportunity to practice how you move from that elevator pitch and open up that space, and then are able to further provide expertise on the topic. So how do we get there? How do we develop this really important elevator pitch, right? So for the 7th time today, anyone's making a game out of it, I said so what again? So start by asking, what do you know about this topic? Now we have to be kind and political about this a little bit, right? So we want to think about our STEM. Like, what do you even know about microbiology? Because I would say nothing, and then I would go cry because I have PTSD from science classes in high school. But if we're asking them, like, hey, what do you know about this process of violence prevention? Right? So if you're asking me to provide, like, I can say, I did some public health classes in college, so I remember kind of these different tenets or philosophies of whatever. So that kind of also gives you a basis for how you can talk, what level of expertise, what level of maybe some jargon you can integrate into that conversation, or how accessible you need to make it overall, right? So it opens up the conversation first for the person to demonstrate their level of engagement and interest. And like I said, it gives you the signal, how am I able to talk about this? How deep can I actually go with this particular content? So it is not an insulting question if you don't ask it in an insulting way. That's basic. So we also want to make sure that we have some analogies prepared in advance. Nice little simile, nice little analogy, metaphor, right? So that we can make it accessible and break it down into a clear topic for non-expert audiences. Like a cell is a city, and the mitochondria is an energy plant. And that is, like I said, have PTSD, so that's really all I remember. But we know that the basic function of this, right? Based on that really common analogy that we all probably remember from middle school and high school. So they're not always going to be as low-hanging fruit as that, but that's your job. That's your expertise coming in where you can provide those analogies. I also have had a couple of good examples of students in the past who have opened up with a pretty good so what. And one a few semesters ago, we were doing an exercise on this in one of the PD sessions, and I said, so who can tell me their so what or open up with that prompt? So that's a clue. Like, might want to be thinking about for a few minutes. But he said, do you like to text and drive? And I said, oh my God, that's so personal. Why would you ask me that question? But we all are guilty of like looking at our phones while we're driving, right? And so he used that as an in to start talking about how his work with drones was eventually going to impact how self-driving cars were operating and how that would eventually allow all of us to be hands-free in terms of driving, and that we could like be on our phones on the 20-minute commute to work or whatever. So it was not necessarily part of his research, right? Like he wasn't researching how many people were on their phones in their cars, right? But he made it accessible and he made it personal to me and to the other audience members, because I don't know how a drone operates. I have no idea. I say all the time, I'm not a woman in STEM. I love you all and I'm grateful for you, but that's not me. So when we think about that, so what, that's an example of how we could potentially open. And then we want to break down jargon. What is jargon?
Specific words pertain to specific fields that a person outside of that field wouldn't typically understand.
Exactly. Specific words for specific fields that specific people know and other people don't. So we don't want jargon for a general audience because we're going to lose them so fast. I know probably at some point in your college career already you've had an instructor that's gotten up there and you can tell this person is brilliant, like some of the smartest people that you'll ever meet, but they don't always have the skill of breaking down their brilliance for people who are in 1,000 or 2,000 level courses, right? So we don't want to be those people. We don't want to be those people. We want to be the instructors that come in and you're like, oh, I immediately feel comfortable with this content, right? So the way that we do that, and probably part of that experience that the professors didn't understand, was that they were using really heavy jargon and not breaking down what those terms meant, how it's applicable to your hands-on learning or whatever you were needing to learn that day. So we need to practice breaking down that jargon. So definition here, like Riley just shared, special words or expressions that are used by a particular profession or group and are difficult for others to understand. Before we go into this, what are some jargon terms that you think might be used in your discipline? So this might take a second of reflection because, again, you're developing a second language that you don't even know you're developing. So sometimes you don't even realize that what you're using is jargon because you're so immersed in that content around other experts in that field who are using that language very comfortably, those acronyms, right, whatever it might be. So what's some jargon? Yes? Ethnography? That's a good one. That's a good research jargon. What is ethnography?
It's the study, but it's not. It's studying a population with the intention of like being right in the way or just kind of gosh, I feel
No, you're doing great. You're doing great.
Sort of like a hands-on way of studying a certain population.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a research method that is used to study a group of people and their culture, their way of life, whatever, all that good stuff. Yes, I'm only able to elaborate because I speak your language, right? I also saw another hand in this area. Yes.
Surface relative velocity.
Yeah, so tell me about that. What's that mean?
Basically the potential for rotation to occur in a thunderstorm.
Okay, never would have guessed. So I get thunderstorms. That's what I know. So then you have to start thinking about how you're able to define one or two more other jargons. Yep.
ANOVA.
ANOVA?
Yeah.
Tell me about ANOVA.
It's analyzing variance between populations.
Analyzing variance between populations. That's a good one. I see one more hand. Yes.
Additive manufacturing.
And what is additive manufacturing?
It's instead of carving a statue out of marble, you're just making a statue.
So 3D printing. Amazing. So you did such a good job of explaining that. I was able to put my context clues together and connect to prior understanding, learning. Okay, so I want to solidify some of your messaging, right? So I really want you to focus on the dejargonizer and the half-life. So the dejargonizer, what this one does is that it identifies what language you are using that is not accessible. So we'll give you an accessibility score. So if you start going in and typing about the fancy word for the thunderstorm stuff and ANOVA and ethnography and whatever and all these other terms, it might give you a low accessibility score, and it will highlight those specific terms and say these are terms that you need to pay attention to and what changes you need to consider making in order to make it more accessible. So it will do the job for you. If you are having a hard time removing yourself from that second language and that immersion of that second language, this is a tool to help you identify what terms you're using that are that second language. And then the half-life. This will help you to simplify your message. So I want to be very, very clear about a couple of things. There are some AI tools like this that are helpful for you to get the ball rolling and helpful to check your work and help you to kind of refine your messaging. Your voice should always be the most amplified one that is used. But we're also going to do a PD session next time, so 2 weeks, on writing an abstract. And so that will need to be done. We really want you to practice developing these skills. When we think about using a tool like the half-life, right, that is not a substitution for you developing your own abstract. So I just want to say that like up front. There are, again, these are tools to help, but it is important that we learn the skills first before we rely on some of these aids to make it better. Right? So we'll develop the abstract piece next week and thinking about how we tailor those two different audiences, like a technical versus a non-technical audience. But to help us start to break down that language, this Needs Organizer is a good place to start. So you might not necessarily, typically we do the abstract one first, so we had some schedule conflicts and needed to swap. So it's a little bit out of order, but that's okay. This might come later. You probably don't need this tool today or this week, but in a couple of weeks you're going to start developing your abstract. You're going to start thinking about how you want to talk and develop your elevator pitch for the symposium. So bookmark this, and this will come in handy soon. Okay, so the title and visualization then. We have some poster creation resources on our Canvas. I'm going to also work on developing some resources for your oral presentation as well, which we have lacked up until this point, to be honest. So we don't have a full PD session on these things, but I do want to take a minute and think about how some of the visuals do contribute to your ability to communicate your elevator pitch and draw an audience in with their so what. So these are screenshots of a YouTube video that is linked in Canvas as well, called the 3-2-1 approach to better charts. So when we think about data visualization, that's a very specific skill that I'm sure your mentor will be able to help you with, we're able to help you with as you think about your poster or your oral presentation, right? It shouldn't just be all words. We like picture books and to make things simple and easy and accessible and digestible. So when you think about your visual, you have to remember you have about 30 seconds to grab attention. I mean, again, we just talked about it. We have the TikTok, the Instagram, and all the other social media that make our attention span very, 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 very short. So it's just as applicable when it comes to looking at visual aids for things like research presentations. So the data should not have to speak for itself. That's a very arrogant thing that you'll hear some academics say, where they don't feel like they have to tell a story. They can say, just look at the data, it speaks for itself. You're going to lose a lot of potential audience members who would be invested in that content if you are not capable of telling the story. Okay? That's your job. You have to become a storyteller. So you can see a couple of different examples here. So the one at the top is trying to get the point across that the data speaks for itself, and that's not what we want to do. But how they designed their poster here, or their infographic, they had a title of Annual Cat Food Sales. Okay, you can see the chart across the bottom. It starts at 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, and it's all the way up to 2022. So you can see this big jump between 2019 and 2020 as to that leap in cat food sales. That by itself, like that is not speaking. I can't hear anything. So then we see the better example where we are thinking about that tailored message and how we're speaking for the data and creating an opportunity to tell a story and engage with audience members. So the title that they chose here is Cat Food Sales Leap in Pandemic. Okay, so we know, again, from our lived experience through that really weird couple of years, that a lot of people were adopting pets in that time. Probably irresponsibly, but they were. And so we're home alone, stuck inside, can't socialize, whatever. Now all of a sudden everyone's a cat lady. So yeah, the cat food sales will leap in that year. Okay, but this context, especially connected to our lived experience and what we knew about that time period in pets, is helpful for us to say, like, that's a correlation I never thought about before. Now, how are the cat food sales doing now today? What are the implications for that long term, right? So it helps us to be able to connect, even if we don't have cats, right? But we can understand again and connect that lived experience. So again, we don't have a whole PP session on this, but I do want to kind of bring attention to that particular skill set and get you thinking about it for the time when you do start to develop your poster and all that good stuff. Okay, so your elevator pitch structure. You will need to include your introduction, your explanation of research goals, discussion of results, hopefully point to visuals if you have that available, and provide conclusions and connect back to your so what. So we're going back to that 5-paragraph essay example again, and that 5-paragraph essay, that introduction, you said, and in this essay, I'm going to point to A, B, and C. Those are your 3 body paragraphs, right? And then your conclusion paragraph, you said, thank you for coming to my essay. I've covered A, B, and C. See you later. But we had those bookends, right? We had the introduction, here's what I'm going to do, and we had the end, here's what I did. Research communication is not much different. We still want to be able to connect why it matters and what made us start questioning this stuff, right? And then how we addressed it. Come back to the so what. So this is we'll give you feedback on your abstracts when you submit your first draft, right? And some of the most common feedback that I give in that first iteration of abstracts is, where are the implications? How are we tying the implications of your research back to the so what? So students do a really good job after hearing me say this for 5 weeks in a row of being able to open up with that hook and that so what, and then at the end I'm like, there's crickets. I don't know how you're tying the loose ends together and what those implications are for next steps or what impact that's going to have moving forward. So we really want to think about that opening opportunity and that closing opportunity to connect all the pieces, right? Okay, so, no, just kidding. We have a few minutes now. I would like for you to take about 4 to 5 minutes and start drafting your elevator pitch for your research project that you're working on right now. Okay, so think about introduction. Big picture, context, what you say what's your hook, explain your research goals and methods. It's okay, you don't have results yet. Yep.
If you're working, like, if you have 2 people on the same project, are you doing your pitches together? Or
That's a great question. If you have 2 people, which a lot of you do because a lot of you are in pairs this summer, you are welcome to do a co-presentation. That is fine. So I'll talk more about what that structure looks like in the submission process later on. You do not have to, but I also recommend you discuss that with your mentor and say, like, are we working collaboratively enough to present on something together, or are you on 2 different rabbit trails to explore something that you might need to be independent? So everyone needs to discuss that, but if it makes sense for you to present together and write together, do that. Yes.
So for our elevator pitch, I might just be a little bit confused because I'm used to elevator pitches being kind of like pitching ourselves to investors and people in a job space.
Sure.
But so for this elevator pitch, are we doing exactly that, or are we doing more so from a sort of business, our research and kind of how we tie into our research? Is it more research based? Is it more, I guess, us?
This is going to be research based.
More research based.
Yeah.
Okay.
So think about the elevator pitch of your current research project. Thinking about it for a general audience and the so what that they need to have to.
Okay. Awesome.
All right. So who's ready to share their bullet points and share their hook, their so what? Yep. Go for it.
Okay, so the hook is cellulose fibers are useful for making eco-friendly plastics. This, but however, they're too expensive to get from hemp fibers. The hook is if we can manage to make them, or not fibers. The so what is if we can manage to extract these fibers from other parts of the hemp plant, we can make them cheaper and more viable for plastic.
Awesome. So the cheaper part is a great one, especially right now, because everything's way too expensive in the whole life. So yeah, start with like, hey, how's your pocketbook? That, mine too. So let's make stuff cheaper. So that's a really good option or opportunity for us to think about how we can kind of draw them in to want to know more about how you're going to do that through hemp plants. Super cool. Who else? Yeah.
Mine is like, have you ever gotten any of those like annoying emails or texts that seem very pesky or fishy and looking for your information?
Every day, but he was right there in the back of the room. So. But,
And then the research is for a game called Glitch Defense, which is supposed to educate on core cybersecurity concepts and like common scams that people run into and know that they are scams or
awesome. That is a common experience. We all, and for UNC Charlotte employees, I don't know if students have to do it too, but we get those trick emails sometimes where they play with us a little bit and they say, oh, we tricked you, this should have been sent to spam or marked as phishing or whatever else. So yeah, we get those for sure. One more. Yeah, go ahead.
Do you know anybody who's had Alzheimer's dementia?
I do.
My research concerns the copper binding protein. And essentially, like the book is not directly on researching, but copper dysregulation has been linked to neurodegenerative disease like Alzheimer's.
Okay, so are you developing a tool or is it like exposure to? Like what's the...
We study a protein that buries copper around your cell, and we think it might be linked to copper dysregulation, which is linked to those diseases.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so that's a good hook. Needs a little bit of refinement. Yeah, we'll go.
Actually, the question is, what if you're, like, I'm struggling with I guess, book or whatever you want to call it. Like, my research topic is maybe not something that most people are open to discussing. So it's kind of like a weird thing to ask people.
Yeah. So the question is like, how do I
Yeah.
create that hook? Yeah.
Yeah. Without being like
That could be, there's a lot of different ways. It could be a statistic. It could be something that is bite-sized from your research, right? That's going to be tangible. So if we're talking, is it domestic violence?
It's about the the rise of sexual chirping since about 2019.
Okay.
And there's been a lot more incidences in it, but there's also a very low risk perception on the harm and so many things. Yeah.
Okay. So it could
It's
be.
really weird to be like. Really didn't want to.
Valid. First time for every kind of question. So, yeah, that it could be a percentage of like connected to like the number of people who have experienced that and felt negatively about it, or how many people are reporting engaging in that. As if it's more prevalent, right? That might be a kind of shocking statistic. Like, hey,
Yeah, 50%.
look around the room. There's 8 people there. Guess what? 4 of them are probably involved in this, and like we don't know. Like it's off the wall, but they're gonna be like, oh wait, and now every time I'm walking down the street, I'm like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm identifying in my head, right? But I'm immediately like, okay, it's something that's bite-sized and tangible, connected to research. Yeah. All right, so those are good starts. Continue to refine that. Like I said, we'll work on the abstract writing next session. So Dr. Garrigan from the Writing Center, who's a magnificent genius, is going to be here to provide her expertise on the topic. I'll be here, but she'll be leading the conversation. So we'll work on kind of building these different writing skills and communication skills cohesively through these different sessions and through the different deliverables that we're gonna ask you to provide for the OUR Summer Scholarship Program. Right. So looking ahead, June 2nd is the next PD, so make sure you have that marked, accept the calendar invite if you haven't already so that you don't forget. We'll be here in the same room every session. And then the RSVP to the summer picnic is on campus. Please come to that. It's a really good time. It's free food. I don't know a college student that wants to say no to free food. So do that. And then your abstracts are going to be due. I just put it on your radar. It's not something you need to worry about. It's not something you need to worry about right now, but July 2nd. So when we get to that June 2nd abstract composition one, that'll kind of kick off like how you need to start developing your abstract. I'm going to take this question real quick here, but then I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Barton because I have to get to another meeting. But he'll be here to answer any OUR specific questions after this one.
Is there a deadline for the RSVP?
Is there a deadline for the RSVP?
We have to do a final food order about a week in advance. So with as many folks as can respond before, what does that put us around the 26th, 27th of May? That would be great. And encourage, again, if you're working with a grad student, a postdoc, somebody in your space, like we're also welcoming them, the faculty mentors, etc. So please encourage as many as possible to RSVP, I guess, within the next week or so, so we have a good idea to place a food order.
Yeah. Okay, so any other questions? I'm going to pass it off to Dr. Barton. Good stuff today, guys. If you have anything that you need from me specifically, you may email me. Any questions for Dr. Barton about OUR? Anything that you were left uncertain about yesterday after orientation?
Yeah, got me okay from you. Wow, that's a loud scream I've ever heard. Any other questions with regards to the program, today's presentation, anything else I can help you with before we send you back to your spaces?
Just to be clear, if we're here in person today, we do not need to do discussion books. That's only if we are absence.
Correct. Yeah, you only have to do the discussion post if you have an excused absence. If you're here and you've signed, so if you are here, make sure you've signed in. If you didn't sign in, then yeah, then that would trigger that. Anything else?
In grad or post grad, would there be like this? Will there be like full-time research positions that you specifically apply for?
Yeah. So, question about full-time positions. So there are different levels of research positions depending on what your degree is. So for post-baccalaureate students, like bachelor students, oftentimes we look at research technicians are really common in STEM disciplines, maybe not as common in the humanities, hit or miss in the social sciences, depending on the discipline. So there are some opportunities to be engaged, not only as a participant, but also sort of on that other side doing research with your bachelor's degree. It's usually prescriptive work, similar to what you'll be encountering most likely if this is your first research experience, where somebody's telling you what to do, you're contributing to the research, but you don't have a lot of autonomy over that project. Getting the graduate degrees, those are your opportunities to begin to develop that autonomy, begin to kind of have a role, whether that is, oftentimes with a master's degree, you might have supervisory capabilities or some ability to sort of control some of the resources and how that works. Doctoral degrees, things like that, where you have more control over actually framing the research itself and deciding what directions you wish to pursue. So there are opportunities on lots of different levels, some of them full-time for the most part as both careers or once you get to graduate school. Again, graduate school looks very different than undergraduate, so I always tell students, as an undergraduate, the end comes no matter what, right? So if you don't complete your project, if you struggle along this process, you still graduate, like the end still comes. You're a graduate student, particularly in a thesis-based program or master's or graduate students, and we'll be talking about, sort of preparing for graduate school, is it the right decision for you, kind of having some of those conversations later this summer. in the workshops, you have to understand the degree doesn't just come, the end doesn't just come. You have to meet the outcomes to get the degree. And so if that, if you're in a doctoral program, they'll advertise it's, 5 years, but if it takes you 7 or 8, you're still there sitting waiting for that degree because it's really dependent on your work. And that takes a little bit different approach and really, we want you to be sort of eyes wide open and really be thinking about, is this the right path for me as you start to ask those questions and consider those options.
Theoretically, say like I end up going to grad school somewhere else, but would I still have the research? Can I still apply for research position at Charlotte?
Typically not, but it just like while you're a grad student, or are we asking?
Yeah.
Yeah, so typically within the university is usually where you'll find your research positions. We'll talk again about the grad school later and start making some of those decisions, but changing institutions between your bachelor's and graduate is not necessarily a bad idea. It gives you a breadth of perspective, it gives you access to different resources than maybe what you encounter in your undergraduate. But typically, as if you're a graduate student, you'll be working within that university and within their partners. It's pretty rare to cross unless there's a collaborative project, right, where you're still working with somebody at that institution. They have to also be working with someone at Charlotte. Other questions?
For this set of spots, it's supposed to be on campus, correct?
I believe so. If it's not, we'll get it posted shortly after the session.
For the PD session on June 2nd, will we be going over?
Off the top of my head, I don't know what the calendar is, but it should be either in Canvas or on our website.
Okay.
Because we have had to make some adjustments every time in the order of things based on when the presentation day is and some other things. And when some of our guest speakers are available. June 2nd one is the one she just said was abstract with Dr. Garahan. So it should be abstract writing with Dr. Garahan on June 2nd. I think Dr. Powell said that before she left.
Okay, that's different than the one on Canvas that says June 9th. Also about developing abstract.
I'll let Dr. Powell know and get that update and make sure it's corrected.
Okay. No, that's for the tier 2.
Oh, yeah, and keep in mind that there are, next week, even though you won't be here, there's another group of students that will be in here.